Hello, good morning, and welcome to Murphy's Law Garage. So why am I sitting on my front bumper with my hood popped, accessory on, and the heat exchanger pump running on my car? Well, I'm back at Tuned by Norm, and we're gonna get back on the dyno. Why? Because the big dyno, the track, says this car is making more power, and we wanna figure that out. Hang around. Dang it. All right, Mitch is busy, so we're trying to get through this pretty quick. We're about to do 293 hits, one in 6th gear, one in 7th gear for comparison's sake for everyone. And then after that, we're gonna spike it with Boostane to 100 octane, and then 6th and 7th gear again. May not be any model log in between, but this is more about the data. We're gonna get through it real quick. .600, 683 in 6th gear. .673 in 7th. All right, everyone, let's talk about the 93 octane numbers for the passes you just saw. In 6th gear, we hit a max, a peak power of 670 horsepower at 538 foot-pounds of torque. If you look on this dyno, we have it next to the 7th gear pass as well, which was approximately 32 horsepower up and 27 foot-pounds of torque up. So if we math that, 7th gear would have made approximately 702 wheel horsepower on 93. And that agrees with the 132 mile an hour trap speed we got at the track on 93, which estimates approximately 709 wheel horsepower. So very, very close here. If you do the math also using Ford's estimate of 15% drivetrain loss, that would put at 702 wheel horsepower, that would put the car making approximately 823 crank horsepower. So about 13 horsepower up from Whipple's claim. Now, that's more than likely, because it was hot, more than likely due to the exhaust the car has, which is freer flowing even than the active exhaust that's said to give the car 6 more horsepower. Next dyno sheet here, we have 6th gear pull comparing 600 miles after install versus the install. And that's, of course, street tire for 600 miles later versus a radial at the time of install, all on 93. This shows a 26 horsepower peak gain and a -8, a loss of 8 foot-pounds of torque. Now, why did that happen? There's going to be some argument here that this was caused by the radial. Maybe so, I'm not sure. What you can see, I've got question marks here at the top of the chart. It looks as if the car either pulled timing or went into catalyst over temp, and the dyno flatlined, attempting to protect the motor or the catalyst. We're not sure, but those suckers are pretty darn close. Most of the power there was to be made was seen in 7th gear over 6th gear from what we see here.
That was 670 wheel. Was 656 wheel.
All right, now I have some data for you on the Boostane dyno hits you just saw. First here we have 6th versus 7th gear on Boostane, street tire of course. The car made a peak in 6th gear of 683 horsepower. And you can see here I did the math for you. The car was carrying about 37 extra horsepower and 32 foot-pounds of torque, median on the curve, before it ran out of rev. It couldn't because of the wheel speed, hit the speed limiter. Due to that, if you do a little bit of math, you can estimate what it would have made in 7th gear in 1-to-1 if it had finished revving, and that was approximately 710 wheel horsepower, approximately 623 foot-pounds of torque, and that would be an estimated, with Ford's 15% drivetrain loss, an estimate of about 831 crank horsepower. This number was lower than I expected, but after thinking about it, it makes sense. Boostane, unlike ethanol, does not contain alcohol. Boostane will only improve the octane rating of the fuel. So we went from approximately 93 octane to about 100 octane. And the fuel from the Shell station I got it from must have been pretty good, because the car didn't pick up very many horsepower over the 93 horsepower, the 93 octane pulls. There's something else with E30. There's a cylinder cooling effect that occurs, which I've noticed to be more dramatic. The hotter it is outside, you tend to see more of a horsepower gain improvement from E30 whenever you're fighting the heat. So something to note here, and you can see I've got written on the dyno graph, is that E30 at 135 mile an hour trap speed when we went to the track Friday, that would approximate to about 758 wheel horsepower. Now, that would mean that there's about 48 horsepower difference between Boostane, if the fuel's okay, the 93 is okay, and E30. And that math seems to jive. That makes sense, especially considering it was 85 degrees outside whenever we made those hits. 135 mile an hour trap speed was very strong for that kind of DA. So E30 works, and the car really seems to like it. On this next dyno sheet, I'm showing you 6th gear E30 versus Boostane, and of course this would be install versus 600 miles later, radial versus street tire. But you can see, because of the improvements the car made in its base horsepower from the day of install versus 600 miles later, you don't see a very large difference between the Boostane and E30 numbers, because most of the horsepower was made up with the improvements in the 93 performance. It is kind of impressive to see just how close these two results were, and possibly indicates that the E30, all it managed to do was to correct a fuel quality issue from the original dyno on the day of the install, and we'll talk a little bit about that after this. The last dyno sheet I'm going to show you here is 7th gear E30 versus Boostane, install versus 600 miles later, radial versus street tire, of course, and that indicates a peak horsepower gain of 16 horsepower and 1 foot-pound of torque. It is very, very, very close numbers. Again, possibly indicating to me that there was an issue with the fuel quality of the 93 when it first got on the dyno. So here comes the difficult part of the conversation, right? Why did the car make more power 600 miles later versus the day of the install? And that's a difficult one indeed. There's going to be people who watch this video and immediately go, somebody's riding somebody's nuts, and Whipple, to save face, sent out a revision. That did not happen. I don't play those games. Whipple could have been more than happy to send me a revision, but I guarantee you we would have went back to the dyno under a revision and shown you the difference from one tune to the other. But that did not happen here. There was no revision. This is the same tune the car had when it got on the dyno when the Whipple was freshly installed. So what are my theories as to what happened? Why did the car dyno poorly on day one? And I have a few going theories here. Some people threw out there that the adaptives hadn't learned yet. And Kelly Aiken, actually, I was talking to him, owner of KellTrac. He said that his car appeared to have picked up some power too over the couple of days after it was installed, because he noticed, much like I did, that the car struggled more and more over the next 2 days to get traction. It was actually something like 2 or 3 mile an hour on a drag you run, which is not insignificant at all, and kind of lines up with the data that I just showed you. So I don't think it's adaptive. I spoke to Nick, who is the tuner at Whipple, and Nick basically nailed that immediately. We had conversations about how hot the MCT, the manifold coolant temperatures, were at the time of the original dynos. And here's part one of my ongoing theory. Approximately 30 hours after the Whipple was installed, I checked on it the day of to make sure coolant level was okay, and it was fine. I checked it again about 30 hours later, and after some hard driving and filming, and found that the reservoir had burped about a quarter of the reservoir worth of coolant, which means there was an air bubble. Filled it, went go do some more testing and driving and filming for the video, and it did it again. Since then, it has not received any more, but in the process of basically a day or two, it had managed to burp half a reservoir's worth of coolant, which means there was a pretty significant air bubble trapped in the system somewhere. Now, we did our due diligence, pulled a vacuum, shook the car up, drove it, and tried to get all the air out, but some still found its way out. I mean, the car does have a relatively complex dual pass system in it, so there's plenty of place for air to get trapped. There's a possibility, and Nick agrees this could be it, that there was a partial airlock in one of the coolers inside of the lid that was preventing it from cooling at full capacity, and could explain why the MCTs were so high, even though we were taking our time when doing the dyno runs. Though, again, it was very hot, so you would expect some of that. So that's theory one. Down on power because heat or inability to cool. Theory number two, of course, is the drag radial. I still do not believe that the drag radial consumed any more than about 5 horsepower. That tire was aired up to 27 psi, and it's a ET Street SS, which is a stiffer sidewall tire. I don't believe that theory, but we're going to put that in here. Of course, our dyno hits today were on a street tire. In fact, they were on a 255 27-inch tire, which normally my rear street tire is a 28-inch tire, so that we could rev the car a little bit further in 7th gear, which resulted in like 100 RPM. It wasn't much before we hit the speed limiter, in the hopes of making it as natural or real or close to what would be expected as possible. The other theory is that it was a fuel problem. Now, the data that we have agrees most with that conversation, right? The data agrees most with, and I'm getting this from looking at the Boostane pulls versus the E30 pulls. E30, from my testing, should have made more power than it did, but it didn't. The Boostane also barely affected the 93 numbers, whatever it was, like 16 horsepower or whatever. It should have been more than that. And actually, I think it was like 12 horsepower. I'd have to go back and look. But regardless, it should have affected it more than that, except for there was no issue with the 93, if that makes sense. So yeah, I boosted it to 100 octane, but the car doesn't need 100 octane to make the horsepower. It's going to use as much octane as it needs to hit its target, right? So that means there wasn't much leeway there for the car to make more power. The fuel was pretty good. The 93 was pretty good, which leads me to believe, why didn't the E30 make more power then on the original pulls? What if the fuel was somehow that bad? Now, that tank of fuel was only like a day or two old, but I can't for the life of me remember exactly what gas station it came from. I'm torn between a Valero and a Murphy's gas station, like the Walmart brand gas station, which Valero tends to have pretty good fuel. But if it came from Murphy's, it could have been from any provider and could have been garbage. I don't know. So that's the other ongoing theory, is that there was an octane rating issue, and the data kind of agrees with that. So I'm going to land on this. Forget the tire conversation. I don't believe it. Maybe 5 horsepower. Two things. Possible partial airlock of one of the coolers inside of the lid because of that air bubble. And then secondly, an octane issue that the E30 at the time only just managed to overcome. The E30 10 to 135 mile an hour pass that the car made, this picture right here, at the track Friday, that seems to indicate about 748 wheel horsepower. And that makes real good sense for the number the car ran. And then the 10.5 pass at 132 estimates at 132 trap speed is about 709 wheel horsepower, and the math on the dyno says 702, so those jive really well. So it would be of no surprise to me that if that car got on the dyno with E30, that we would see about 745-ish probably wheel horsepower on E30, which is a good improvement over Boostane. So if you're curious, Boostane is not the route you want to take if you want to make more power at the track. The Boostane will help you if your fuel's garbage or if you're in a place that has only 91, that sort of thing. But it is not the penultimate, if you will, if you want to make more power. The reason that car went as fast as it did in that heat was the E30. Not only the fact that we increased the octane to about 97 points, but we also cooled the cylinder. You cool the intake charge, lowers the EGT of the combustion. That helps in heat, and I found that effect to be gradiently more as the temperature gets hotter outside and less when it's cold. You don't need as much E when it's cold outside, obviously, because the DA is better. The car is already making more power, but it just doesn't help as much. So there you have it. Was Whipple's 810 crank horsepower estimate right? Technically Ford tested that, right? The answer is yes, my car agrees. Now that whatever the problem was is not there, my car agrees. Moreover, it's actually higher. It's a 820 something horsepower that we're about making. And that's probably due to the exhaust, because it's going to be more free-flowing than even the active setup that these cars come with. So there you go. Whipple already apologized in the other video with the car running a 10.2 to a track racer like me. I didn't need a dyno to tell me at that point that the car was making the power. Trap speed and weight is all I need to make that determination, and you can see how accurate that is here. But it's a challenging thing, right? So we reported out on it and said the car made one number, and it's not that it was a bad number. And Terry Reeves pointed out that it was in the ballpark, and he's not incorrect, but it was a little too far away for me or Mitch to feel comfortable saying that the car was actually making its rating. It just wasn't quite right. Had the car hit something like high 660s, low 670s, that's like, it's hot, whatever, there's a radial in the car, it's close enough. To us, it wasn't there. So I needed this extra data. I needed the ET. I needed that trap speed and the weight of the car. We had the car scaled. It scaled at 3950 if you want to do the math, and with me in it. So I needed those things for myself and for my viewers and the people who are installing these kits to fully understand and get a full picture of what the number is. Will these cars make that real world number from the install video in some conditions? Like if it's very, very hot outside? Yes. I mean, that's real world, right? You're going to get fuel that's 90 instead of 93, and you're going to have extremely hot temperatures. So at least you have a clear picture of both. And the fact that that sucker went a 10.2 at 135 on E30 is crazy. And I know some people are like, oh, S550s have been in the 9s and blah, 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 blah. Those are stage 2 cars. Full weight like this one. Yeah, stage 2 car should be low 10s, high 9s. This is a stage 1 car, and they were doing that in good air. Stage 1 in 2000 DA that ran a 10.2, and it had more in it. I stopped because we needed to get going and get picked up for the day. I probably could have got a high 10.1 out of it. So the car is moving faster than I expected, and I think most people did. I'll tell you this, I've grown more and more impressed by the quality of the tuning and drivability of this car. The more that I've driven it, I've got 600 miles on it, right? It's only been a little while since the supercharger was on, and it's amazing. 22 miles to the gallon if you're driving normally, not hypermiling, like normal driving. And it drives like any other car until you put the pedal down, and it's a rocket ship. So no nut riding here, guys. Whipple did a great job with this one. They did meet their claimed horsepower, and I look forward to seeing just how far into the 9s I can bring a stage 1 car with warranty come fall. Anyways, thank y'all so much for listening to my rant. I hope y'all enjoyed this part of the series, and we're going to progress beyond this conversation now, and you all can just fight in the comments. I don't care anymore. Car's fast. It's real fast. It's making the power. Suck it. Anyways, we love you. God bless. Peace.